postponed. That law was a proposal by the federal government that telecommunications companies and internet providers store up to 2 years' worth of your phone call information, your email information, and everything else, so that the spy agencies can access it should they wish to. Yesterday what happened was the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Intelligence and Security issued its voluminous report on this law and a whole lot of other things, and said it wasn't convinced the government had sufficiently addressed the privacy and civil liberty concerns, which was one of my points. And the second was by the Federal Attorney General Mark Dreyfus, who said that he had now sidelined that proposal until after the election. The committee was especially critical that it had been asked to approach its task without seeing a single word of the proposed legislation. It was just an idea. That was, the committee said, quote, a serious constraint on its capacity to form recommendations. Of course. In Parliament speaking, that's saying that the government's trust me didn't cut it with the committee. Good on them. Now I'd like to move on from discussing what our governments might be doing to what out-and-out bad guys are doing. Criminals, hackers, spies, etc. Let me pose some scenarios for you. What if your mobile phone in your pocket or your purse or the computer on your desk blew up? What if stock markets collapsed? And I mean really collapsed. What if Sydney's power network shut down tonight? Things plucked from a thriller writer's fertile imagination? Perhaps. And indeed I've woven catastrophes like those into The Trusted. But they are no longer fanciful possibilities. When the Director General of ASIO, David Irvine, spoke to the Financial Review in January this year, this is what he said, and I quote, "A single malicious algorithm could switch off our lights, stop all planes flying, disrupt whole countries' financial networks, or shut down their electricity grids." In other words, while my premise in The Trusted may be fiction, it is not fantasy. Now, the cyber revolution some time ago reached a crossroad where malefactors no longer need complex networks or buckets of money to achieve their dastardly goals. They could simply free ride on what technology and globalisation were now making available for free. Well, not strictly for free, but if you're smart and bad, you can get any cool technology for free simply by stealing it. So when I started writing the book, I imagined as a possibility a single bad guy on a beach or in a car park wreaking havoc on a global scale, so long as he had the right tools or codes at his fingertips, plus phone signal. The only thing protecting the free world, therefore, would be that the bad guy was using Vodafone and didn't have signal. But the truth is, we have reached that crossroad. Fact, in April this year, Spanish police arrested a Dutch citizen who was initially alleged to have launched the biggest cyber attack in history. And from where? His camper van. Fact, in March this year, the global CEO of BP, the global energy giant, Bob Dudley, revealed that BP receives 50,000 cyber attacks a day. 50,000 is a mighty big number. The most costly cyber crimes are caused by denial of service, web-based attacks, and malicious insiders. Now, someone who has lots of experience with web-based attacks and malicious insiders is our Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, so she must know something about this stuff. She confirmed recently that in 2012, the Australian government suffered 438 cyber incidents that were so serious they required a significant response by the government's Cyber Securities Operations Centre. She also reported that around 5.5 million Australians were victims of cybercrime in 2012, with an estimated cost to the economy of 1.65 billion, and perhaps that's where the famed surplus went. But here's the thing. We, you, me, all of us, the good guys, we aren't helping ourselves. So So, as Alan said earlier, we do need a holistic approach from government, but we also need businesses and individuals to look after themselves and not expect someone else to do it for us. Studies in 2012 provide some shocking figures, at least shocking to me. Only 49% of companies have bothered to install cyber detection technology. So, half the firms out there don't have any cyber protection at all. If that doesn't worry you, maybe this will. Only 51% of companies insist that the laptops, mobile devices, tablets that their employees use are configured with security settings or controls. Only a half. A massive 40% don't require security settings at all, and 9% didn't have a clue. On top of that, a whopping 60% of firms shrug their shoulders and say, look, doesn't matter what we do, our employees circumvent or disengage whatever security features we put in anyway. So it's pretty easy for the bad guys, isn't it? Another study, a couple of years ago or a few years ago, found that 12,000 laptops were lost in US airports, not every year, every week. More than half of those laptops held confidential information. And 2/3 of the people who lost those laptops had not bothered to do anything to secure those laptops or that information before it was lost. Now remember, we are in an asymmetric war. And while the statistics suggest that most of us are pretty dumb, the crooks are getting smarter. One of their favourite tools is what's called socially engineered phishing, and you spell phishing with a PH, not an F. Almost 1/3 of all targeted attacks come from this, and a whopping 95% of state-affiliated espionage, it is said, comes from this too. Well, what the hell is it? It's where the bad guys identify their target. They search corporate websites, Facebook, Twitter, news reports to find whatever useful information they can about the target. Then they make up a spoof email, a fake email, that appears to come to you from a trusted insider. So it says it comes from someone you know, and they send it to you. Now, 2 years ago, cyber fishermen hooked a monster catch. Irony of ironies, it was one of the world's most sophisticated cybersecurity firms called RSA. Now, RSA makes these things. I don't know if you've seen them. Banks give them to you, and basically they are a secure ID, two-factor authentication token that generates random passwords, and you can't enter whatever site it is or account it is without this. A spoofed email from a recruiting firm popped up in RSA's HR department, and it had the header 2011 recruitment plan and a message, I forward this file to you for review, please view it and open. Fact, a few weeks later, RSA recalled 40 million of these tokens because, well, they weren't secure anymore. Now, one of the hackers who gave me technical advice for my book says he targets his phishing so well that his success rate is 3 clicks out of every 4 emails he sends. Now, not only are the bad guys phishing, there is a thriving black market in what's called crimeware, or weaponized exploits, or code the bad guys sell each other to exploit vulnerabilities in software or websites. They're sold on a kind of eBay for terrorists, what's called the underweb or the deep net, though I wonder who the bad guys use for clearing their checks. Facing all this, the statistics plus anecdotal evidence that I got from asking numerous questions of people in corporate Australia suggest that many Australian businesses and individuals are operating with our eyes closed, one arm tied behind our backs, and the other crossing its fingers. And the evidence is, most of us have no idea what might be going on under our very noses, quite apart from what we now know our governments are doing under our noses, apparently, hopefully, legally. Now, while most data exfiltration, or stealing, takes only a few hours, if not minutes or seconds, one study says that in an astonishing 66% of cases, the victims only discover it months or years later. Partly, that's because they're not looking. A big problem is that too few of us think like the bad guys. But that's what a thriller writer does for a living. And with my past as both a lawyer and an investment banker, I reckon I got some good early training on how bad guys think. Now, let's look at how close real life has already got to the fictional picture that I was painting in my book. In The Trusted, I point out a huge vulnerability that I think we have in our financial markets, and that is algorithmic or high-frequency trading. This is where super powerful computers, run by programs, not by people, scan markets and news reports simultaneously, trawling for brief opportunities, pushing orders into the market, often in milliseconds. If you add HFT, high-frequency trading, to cybercrime, the potential for instant, and I mean instant, economic catastrophe is mind-blowing. Fact, on April the 24th this year, the Syrian Electronic Army triggered a trading frenzy that in 3 minutes drove the Dow down 149 points, wiping $140 billion, around 1% off the market's value. All they did was hack into the Associated Press's Twitter account and falsely tweet that 2 explosions in the White House had injured President Obama. Now, the plunge didn't last very long because Associated Press immediately corrected the tweet. But without high-frequency trading and algorithmic trading, the panic wouldn't have been as bad or as quick. How did the Syrian Electronic Army get the password for that account is an interesting question. Perhaps it was phishing. Or perhaps one of the trusted insiders gave it to them. Far-fetched? Well, maybe not. Fact, in April this year, Reuters, the big news agency, fired its deputy social media editor, a guy called Matthew Keys, who police later charged with giving the infamous hacking group Anonymous the computer network logins for his prior employer, the owner of the Los Angeles Times and other newspapers. As one of my bad guys in The Trusted says, why bother occupying Wall Street when you can destroy it from the inside? Now, what about cloud computing, the trend du jour? Outsourcing your data and systems onto someone else's network is economically hugely attractive. Many of us do it almost unthinkingly. How many of you are on Gmail, for example? Quite a few. But clouds carry some very big risks. First, they make you a target when you weren't before. If you're sharing a cloud that happens to also have government departments and big multinationals in it, that cloud and everybody in it, including you, is suddenly a very big, juicy target. Worse, the cloud is a single point of failure for the hundreds or thousands of firms using it. Crack a cloud open and voila, you have bad guy heaven. What is already called hyperjacking. And may I say, if it has a cyber name, it will happen. And if your cloud happens to be operated by a US company or a UK company, maybe Operations Prism or Operation Tempora already have access to your secret data. Next, I said earlier, what if your computers blew up? Well, the bad guys had actually done that already. Fact, last August, Cutting Sword of Justice wanted to cripple the Saudi Arabian economy and global energy production. They managed to implant their Shamoon worm in the national energy giant Saudi Aramco's computers. And while they didn't succeed in shutting off the oil supplies, they did wipe 30,000 computers clean. A lot of computers. Here are some more real-life examples from my earlier postulations. How do you shut down a city's power plants? Well, Increasingly, power plants and other utilities are operated by what are called SCADA systems. SCADA stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. In simple terms, SCADA is an internet-facing, remotely accessible computer control system that is used to monitor and control things like pipelines, energy and water utilities, traffic systems, airports, stuff like that. Very sensible in this day and age. But if you think we're safe, if you think that the companies who are running these systems are competent, as are the bureaucrats regulating them, you might be wrong. Fact, in Finland, in January this year, researchers from Aalto University went looking and they discovered 2,915 unsecured, completely exposed, internet-facing SCADA systems in their own country. They were running critical industrial automation, power management, transport and water supply systems, and remote access systems, including building automation for a bank, for a hospital, and if that's not bad enough, the building automation for a jail. So now, all a well-heeled Finnish mafia boss needs to do to get out of jail is to hire a hacker. Fact, also in January this year, the US Department of Homeland Security reported in the first 6 months of last year, cyber criminals stole data that could disrupt or damage 23 gas pipeline networks across America. Fact, in September, allegedly Chinese hackers hit a Canadian group, Telvent, that specialises in SCADA systems, and they stole project files for a control system used in North America's electricity grid, its oil and gas pipeline systems, and some water system networks. Fact, the Stuxnet worm that supposedly the US and Israel collaborated on and infected Iran's nuclear facilities with in 2010, well, Stuxnet is apparently still alive. It attacked an Iranian electricity plant last December. None of that was fiction, though it sort of sounds like it, doesn't it? So, if you or I can imagine it, they can probably do it already, whoever they are. So to stop them and stay ahead of them, we need to stop being quite so trusting and start protecting ourselves by, I suggest, thinking like bad guys. And if you want to find out how, get yourself a copy of The Trusted. Thanks for listening.
Our third speaker in tonight's forum is Thomas Barlow. Thomas Barlow is Australia's leading research strategist. Over many years, he's advised a range of technology-intensive companies, many of Australia's universities and major government research agencies, as well as Australian policymakers at both state and federal levels. He's held prestigious research fellowships at Oxford University in the UK and at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He has been a science advisor to the Minister for Education, Science and Training, the Australian Government, and has worked as a weekly columnist for the Financial Times newspaper in London. Independent and widely recognised as an innovative thinker, Dr. Barlow is highly